And we are live. Guys, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Let's Talk Fishing video podcast. I am Jay Angel. I'm going to be your podcaster, your master of ceremonies here. Tonight, I have a really interesting guy. Man, me and this guy were talking before the show. I was almost late coming on because of that. Rex Moncrief has been literally writing about the outdoors, getting cool outdoor content since the 90s. And he's into just about everything. He is so much more tech savvy than I could ever hope to be. I'm really looking forward to talking to this guy. How are you doing tonight, Rex?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm doing great. You know, we were talking before the show. Why don't you just give the people a quick synopsis of what is the outdoor? What do you do for the outdoor news?
You know, it's kind of interesting. It's really hard for me to say right now. I'll jump back into history a little bit and talk about when I got into fishing and the outdoors and you know, video and multimedia. So long story made really short, my dad got me into a bass club back in 1984. I came home from high school one day. I was like a freshman in high school, and he said, hey, and we didn't ever bass fish that much. You know, we had a farm, so we went brim fishing on our ponds and did a little crappie fishing or sac-a-lait, as y'all call it, fishing. But we didn't ever bass fish very much. But anyway, I came home from school one day and Dad said, we're joining a bass club. And so he got me in it and I loved it. Well, he fished one tournament and he decided, no, that's too much work. So we never really bass fished very much again, but I was hooked. Well, fast forward into the early 90s, a friend of mine, John Brown Jr., who since went on to work in the outdoors industry on the hunting side of things. We had an idea and put together a 5-minute talk show that we did on the local news segment I think it was every Friday morning, if I remember correctly. And that evolved into a full-blown 30-minute outdoors TV show, and we were on in a couple of markets and all that. And that was all back in the early to mid-90s era. Well, I went on to work in the bass boat industry and actually helped build and design bass boats and all that. John, my partner, went on into the hunting industry and went on to be a very well-known producer. And, you know, the outdoor news kind of died off at that point. But anyway, so fast forward to about 5 or 6 years ago, a good friend of mine got me back into bass fishing. I had kind of gotten out of bass fishing for about 10 years. He talked me into helping out some of the local high school leagues and teams and all that. And I got back into multimedia, and I kind of rebirthed, so to speak, the outdoor news. And so to answer the question, what the outdoor news is, it's one of my platforms. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I have a TikTok channel as well. I've also got a website, and I just try to put out interesting content. I mean, sometimes that may be fishing videos. I've got several videos out there where I'm fishing Caddo Lake and some other places. Sometimes I've got a good friend of mine, Duke Lowry, here that lives up around Bossier, and we'll do interesting things like he's got a crawfish farm, and so we put out a couple of videos with that. And we've even done some really cool stuff. Last week we interviewed the Secretary of the Wildlife and Fisheries, Madison Sheehan, and we can talk some more about that. But anyway, we interviewed her. So I also do some live shows and try to have on some guests every now and then, and sometimes I'm just on my soapbox. So yes. I don't know. I didn't really answer the question succinctly there, but that's kind of the concept of the outdoor news. Interesting content and interesting multimedia.
You know, one of the really interesting things that we were talking about before the show, Rex, was...
And we'll do interesting things like he's got a crawfish farm. Hold on.
That's like, whoa. One of the interesting things we were talking about before the show was you were talking about why doesn't Louisiana have more 13-pound bass like Texas does?
Right.
You talk about a soapbox. That makes me want to scream.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So it is, but I'll get back on my soapbox again. And so anytime, you know, you need to just break in there.
Sure.
But Louisiana has plenty of big bass. We've got plenty of fertile water. But the two shining examples that have been Caney Lake and now Bussy Break. Now, I don't know if you know the whole history of Caney Lake, and I'm talking about Caney Reservoir down there around Jonesboro and Chatham. You know, it's south of Monroe and West Monroe. But Caney was one of the first designated trophy lakes in the state of Louisiana, and they stocked Caney. They managed it well. They just did almost everything right with Caney, and it was producing big bass. It produced the state record. It produced, I think, at one time, it had 7 out of the 10. I think it still has 4 or 5 out of the top 10 fish in the state of Louisiana. And everything was going great until the hydrilla got to be a problem with the camp owners and the boat owners around the lake. And unfortunately, the Wildlife and Fisheries made the decision to put grass carp in Caney Lake. And also, unfortunately, they put the grass carp in there at a ridiculous stocking rate, and they did their job. They ate all the grass. Well, that didn't kill the big fish. It just changed the fishery, and it changed the spawning habits. And so Caney went from this booming metropolis, literally, where you had to park half to 3/4 of a mile down the highway from the boat ramp and walk back to get on the lake, into a virtual ghost town as far as bass fishing is concerned. Well, anyway, so the Wildlife and Fisheries realized their mistake. The carp have pretty much died off. The hydrilla is back, and the Wildlife and Fisheries is committed to not putting carp back in that lake and managing the hydrilla. And the big fish are back, and we've seen it with the MLF tournament series and all that was down there. There's been several of the high school kids that are catching 30 plus and 40-pound stringers out of the lake. So it's on the rise, producing those big bass again, because it's a well-managed lake. Now, Caney's unique in Louisiana. It's one of the few lakes that has lots of deep water. And although it's not a real fertile lake like some of the lakes are as far as the watershed, it's still got lots of deep water structure, deep water sort of thing. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got Bussy Break. And Bussy Break's a little bit different. It's a small lake also, but the Wildlife and Fisheries has literally revamped all of Bussy Break and kind of rebuilt it from scratch. And we see the results of that. I mean, it's producing double-digit fish every day, almost every day of the week. So Louisiana can produce it when they put their mind to it. But the challenge is, I don't know what the challenge is. I don't know how to change that mindset to where Louisiana is focused on big fish and the business that it brings in, specifically big bass.
Boy, I tell you what, you said a lot right there. I'm trying to think about how I'm going to.
I'm pretty full. I'm pretty full of it. So, like I said, you'll have to stop me if I get on my soapbox too much.
Do you think if we had a trophy program like Texas does with the Texas Sharelunker program, would that help?
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, I would argue that, and look, on my outdoor news show last week, Duke and I interviewed Madison Sheehan. I mentioned that earlier. We interviewed Madison Sheehan. She's the new and relatively young, she's only 26 or 27 years old, Secretary of the Wildlife and Fisheries. She's head of the Wildlife and Fisheries. And I stressed to her that if at all possible, the state of Louisiana needed to model what the Texas Sharelunker program is doing. Because I don't know if you've ever been to their fish hatchery and all that over there in Athens, Texas, but it is a marvel to behold.
No, I haven't.
It is a place that you just need to make. Yeah, it's one of those deals where you just need to go there to see their operation and how they do it. I mean, they post lists of certified weigh stations. They have phone numbers. You can call them, and it may take them an hour or two or a couple hours or whatever to get an agent over to you, but they will come, weigh the fish, take care of the fish, help with the DNA sampling, all these sorts of things that Texas is able to do. There is no reason that we can't do that over here. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I'm not so sure we're the sportsman's paradise anymore. And we need to get back into that mindset. Yeah. So I'm hoping that, Miss Madison and all that is going to bring some changes. She's processing a lot of information, and we had a great interview with her. She was very attentive. She answered any of the questions we had for her, and I thought she did a great job. So I'm hoping that it's not the boots on the ground guys. It's not the biologists and the enforcement agents. It's the upper level, political part of the wildlife and fisheries that needs a whole new mindset. And I'm hoping that she's going to be able to do that and change the direction of the wildlife and fisheries, and specifically what I'm interested in and I love, which is bass fishing.
And I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I just could not agree with you more about that.
All right, so I'm gonna do a little bit of sharing here. So yeah, I'll be quiet for a few minutes and let you have your own show back. But I'm going to be sharing out, so I'm listening to you.
Okay, I completely agree that the potential is here. The potential for giant bass is here in Louisiana, particularly central, north Louisiana, South Louisiana. We have a lot of water, but we have all kinds of problems down here, like hurricanes and saltwater intrusion that comes with hurricanes, all kinds of stuff like that. And every few years, the fishery is wiped out, and then we just have to wait till it regenerates. But North Louisiana doesn't have that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have that problem. I mean, we do get floods up here. We've had plenty of rain up here, and a lot of our watersheds, a lot of our lakes up here have fairly large watersheds. But we certainly don't have the saltwater intrusion that you guys have down there, and certainly not the hurricanes. And so we're able to have more stable fisheries. But, it's one of those things that Louisiana has always been known, not necessarily for quality. Louisiana has always been known for quantity. And look, that's fine for the guys that want to go out and catch their fish and fillet them and eat them. I'm all about that. I mean, I practice catch and release and bass fish only because I'm too lazy to clean my fish. After being raised in the better part of my childhood cleaning fish all the time, I don't clean fish, but for the guys that want to catch fish to eat, hey, I'm all about that. But there's this whole other side with catching quality fish that is an industry and a business in itself, and specifically on the bass fishing side and the crappie fishing now, the sac-a-lait fishing. I mean, that's turned into a whole industry itself. Red fishing. I'm about to go to a red fishing banquet and dinner up here in Shreveport tomorrow night. But the red fishing has turned into a big business. And so I think if we try to focus more on the quality rather than the quantity and put our efforts towards that, I think Louisiana still has the potential to be something special. It's going to take a while, to build it up to that. But
it's going to take a while.
Again, looking at Bussy Break and looking at, the what I call the rebirth of Caney Lake in the last few years, I mean, it's definitely doable. One other thing, though, is we're not building any new lakes. I mean, Bussy Break's new, but Bussy Break's been there for 35 or 40 years. It just got revamped. So another interesting comment, I'd like to get your take on this too. Rick Clun made a comment on, I think it was Dave Mercer's podcast I was listening to a couple of months ago, but he made the comment, and it just kind of stuck with me because I had never really thought of it. Most of the lakes we fish in the United States, most of them, 80% of them, the lakes that we all know and fish, are man-made. They weren't here 100 years ago or 125 years ago. They weren't here. Yeah, reservoirs. It's all about water. Look, I'll tell you this. Most people don't realize most of the lakes in Texas are to feed water to Dallas and Houston.
Yes.
Lake Fork, most people don't know this. I used to work on the edge of Lake Fork in a little town called Alba, Texas there. I worked for a jack plate company for a couple of years. And Texas was in the process of completing the pipeline from Lake Fork. There is a 6-foot water pipeline that runs from Lake Fork all the way to Dallas. They finished that or nearly completed it while I was working there. And I think if I remember correctly, Texas has the legal right to draw something like 20 plus feet of the water table off of Lake Fork. It was not designed for fishing. It's designed for water.
Most of them are either water supply lakes or Yeah, they're almost all water supply lakes or hydroelectric lakes.
Yeah, and so of course, we don't seem to have the problem here, and we don't have the huge population centers like Dallas and all that for the most part. But still, we're not building any new lakes. Now, Texas just built that new one. I think it's called Boat Ark Lake or whatever in the northeast corner of Texas up there. I think it's around Sulphur Springs or somewhere.
And some of
And
their
so
new
they've
lakes,
got a new one.
some of their new lakes, our newer lakes, are producing state records over in the western side. I agree with you, man. Louisiana has to invest, and I am going to use that word invest because that's what it is. If you build, just like the movie says, if you build it, they will come, and that is the bass and the bass fishermen.
Right.
And
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, we were down there this past weekend, so I'm involved with a high school fishing tournament trail. Well, I guess I kind of just announced it, but yeah, we're going to turn it into a full-blown trail probably next year. But anyway, called the High School Bass Classic. And we put on a tournament for high schoolers around Morgan City this past weekend down at Dyron's Landing down there. And I got to say, Larry Dyron is a super nice guy. I mean, he was so accommodating. But he's got a gold mine down there, and he knows it and knows how to run it as such. His customer service, he bent over backwards to make sure all the fishermen, not just us, putting on the tournament. And Tommy with Bass Nation was there that Sunday and had his tournament trail there too. But Larry and his staff go out of the way, not just to make us, feel great, but all the fishermen, all the anglers, because he gets it and he sees how much income and revenue and how much business he can get from everybody coming into that store and using his facilities. And I got to say, it was really refreshing to see that because a lot of the lakes, especially.
What I like about dry runs is that you can fish either side of the levee, and there's hundreds of miles. If you go on one side, you can go up into Lake Verret, where there are some bigger fish in Lake Verret than there are in the rest of the spillway, or you can go on the other side and fish hundreds of miles of the spillway, and you'll get yourself lost if you don't know where you're going. But
yeah, it was pretty much a
fish in there. It's not, if you get into the right place. You can cull through dozens of fish if you get into the right place there.
Yeah, a lot of the kids that fish, I mean, they didn't have big stringers, 10 to 12 pounds, but some of them did catch a large quantity of fish. Now, I think the bite was off a little bit. The Atchafalaya over on the levee side was kind of up and flowing and a little muddy, and so not too many teams went over on that side. But there were a couple of good, I think big fish in the tournament, I have to go back and watch the video. I think big fish in the tournament was about 3.5 pounds. I mean, down here, or up here where I'm at, I fish Caddo Lake a lot and Lake Bistineau and all these other lakes. And I mean, 3.5 pounds up here. I mean, Caddo Lake, that's in the slot. You got to throw those fish back because we have slot limit on Caddo. But the kids all had fun. And the point of it is, I was really struck by the business that he had there and how booming it was. And I got to say, everybody was nice around there. I mean, that whole area around there is built around that fishing community.
Oh yeah. Well, I got a question for you then. Let's take Toledo Bend and Bus Station. What do you think? Which lake, other than those two, do you think has the greatest trophy potential? I'm talking quality in your area, in the northwest section of.
Well, all right. So Toledo Bend's producing Sharelunker after Sharelunker as well. I think Bussy right now has the biggest potential to grow a state record class fish, but I will say that Bussy Break is way smaller than Toledo Bend. I mean, Toledo Bend's 180,000 acres at pool stage. I mean, there are creeks on Toledo Bend the size of most of the lakes that we fish around here. So Toledo Bend is huge. It's a huge expanse of water.
Yeah.
And so that makes your chances of catching some of those record class fish decreased. Whereas in Bussy Break, I think it's, I don't know, 3,000 acres, 4,000 acres. I forget the size of it. And so you're packed in more tightly there. And so the chances of somebody catching one are greater because it's just simply a smaller lake. But Bussy's also a new lake, relatively new. Again, they revamped it, so we consider it pretty much a new lake. Toledo Bend's been around since what, the 50s, early 60s. And it's had its peaks and valleys, but it's going through another upswing again. And as you know, BSS has ranked it, one of the top 10 lakes or top 5 lakes or whatever for the last couple of years. So I would say either one. Bussy, you probably have a better chance only because it's a smaller lake. But Toledo Bend is a fine lake as well.
What would be your next pick? Taking those two out of the equation and not talking about them.
Either Caddo or Bistineau.
Okay.
So I fish Caddo Lake a lot. And I would say it's probably, there haven't been as many 11, 12, 13, 14 pound fish come out of Caddo in the last few years as there were several, years ago. Friend of mine that's on one of the high school teams, he just caught one about 10 and a half the other day. And I mean, but we regularly catch 7 to 8, 9, 10 pound fish on on Caddo, and regularly catch 4 to 7, 5, 6, 7, 8 pound fish. Now I sound like Roland Martin, on Bistineau as well. So both of those have a high potential. Caddo is it's a gorgeous lake. They call it a natural lake. It's not really because it's got a dam on it. That dam was put in like back in the early 1900s, but it's a naturally formed lake. And it's just, I mean, it's so fertile. There are just a ton of 4 to 6 and 7 pound class fish in that lake, and lots of fish even bigger. Same thing with Bistineau as well. And then I'll tell you something else, Claiborne Lake. They put those those tiger bass in Claiborne Lake. Claiborne it took a 30-pound sack to win a tournament on Claiborne just a few weeks ago. So Claiborne's got some big fish potential in it. And I would argue even Lake Darbone up at Farmerville, which is like my home lake that I grew up on as a kid, Darbone still has the potential. But it's kind of going through, just watching the numbers, going through a little bit of a climb. But I would say Claiborne, oddly enough, has some potential. Bistineau and Caddo certainly, and then of course Toledo Bend and Bussy Break.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. It's by Roy Widgeon of USA Kayak Fishing Magazine. He said, do you use forward-facing sonar?
Absolutely. But I'll say this. I just put it on my boat about a year ago, and I bought a couple of Garmin units, and so I'm running those. Most of the water I fish in, my trolling motor is churning mud. On Caddo, if my trolling motor is not churning mud, I'm pretty much too deep most of the time. But interestingly enough, I use perspective mode on it some. But I can count on one hand the number of bass that I can directly attribute to catching on forward-facing sonar. But here's what I use it for. Whether I'm using it in perspective mode or whether I'm using it in regular forward-facing mode, I use it to find the structure and find the weed lines. I'll give you a good example. So I caught one a little over 7 pounds on Caddo a couple of months ago, and the fish were still in the river. And it was no secret spot that I was in, but this one particular area, I usually catch some pretty decent fish there. And so I was using the forward-facing sonar to keep my boat lined up to the edge of the weed bed, and was coming down it with a little shallow running square bill crankbait. And I could actually see the bass coming out of the grass to the edge and cruising after that crankbait. And I actually saw the one about 7.5. Well, it was a little over 7 pounds. And I caught one about 4.5 that I actually saw them cruising behind it with the forward-facing sonar. But I was really using it just to keep my boat positioned where I needed to on the grass and the weeds. So that's mainly what I use it for. I use it to scan around cypress trees and, see what's around the cypress trees. But the truth is, because of the shallow water that I fish and the way that most of the lakes are here, those bass are really good at hiding. It's not like chasing crappie in open water, or you see a lot of them doing the catching the bass in open water, because here, deep water is 6 feet. So I hope that answers the question. I lose you, Jay? It looks like we have a little connection hiccup, so I don't know if we're still on or not. I guess we'll find out here in a second.
My reception up here, that's really good. Sorry about this. Very sorry about this.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'm used to it. I'm a tech guy. Oh, looks like I lost Jay. So I guess we're still live. I guess I'll just kind of take over a show. Of course, I can't see any of the comments or anything. But let me get back on my soapbox in case we are still live about the forward-facing sonar. I'm a big proponent of it. I follow the Rick Clunn philosophy that what forward-facing sonar has done is it has shown us that about 80% of what we thought we knew out of all these years in bass fishing, forward-facing sonar has shown us. Yeah, I just kind of took over your show for a little bit, kicked you off. But anyway, what forward-facing sonar, what forward-facing sonar has done, I was just saying, is I kind of follow the Rick Clunn philosophy on that. He did a podcast, I think it was Mercer's podcast, where he was talking about it. And he said that what forward-facing sonar has done is it has shown us that about 80% of what we thought we knew about bass was wrong all these years. And so I'm a huge proponent of it. Yeah. And look, it's not like I'm out there whacking them on forward-facing sonar. I can count on one hand the number of fish I can directly attribute that I've caught because of forward-facing sonar. But it's another tool in the box, like side scan and all that I'm a big believer in, because it shows us what's down there. You may not realize this. Back in the 90s, I went to when I was getting in the bass boat business. Yeah, go ahead. You still there?
What I think it has shown us is that bass are always moving. We thought that bass stayed in the same place. Oh man, is this happening again?
Yep. No, I think you're still there, Jay. I'm just taking over the bandwidth. No, okay, I can still hear you. I think we got a little bit of lag. But you bring up an interesting point. I tell people this all the time. I say what forward-facing sonar, what live scope is showing us is that fish swim, and they swim a lot. I used to have this mental picture because of, regular side scan and 2D sonar and down scan and all that. You just kind of have this mental picture that, okay, you go over a piece of structure and you see the fish and you see the structure and the fish just stays right there in that position and never moves. No, live scope teaches us that they move and swim a lot. Imagine that fish actually swim.
They do. I started learning that when I was guiding, when I would fish a 45-degree angle riprap shoreline, and it went down to about 26 feet. And as the sun came up, I would lose my bite. It would be right up on the shoreline when the sun came up. But then I started, one day I got blown out, and I found that those fish were down in 25 feet of water now. So I started drop shotting for them, and that extended that bite for almost half the guide trips. So I started learning that. It took years to learn that kind of stuff. Forward-facing sonar taught us in a couple of years.
Yeah, and so, I don't fall into the, Randy Blockett whole deal of it's killing fishing and all that, because look, let's face it, 80% of the fish we catch as bass fishermen anyway, we practice catch and release and turn them loose. I would argue, and again, I don't keep fish to eat. If I want to go eat fish, I'm having somebody else fry them. I go buy the fish at the restaurant. Yes. But there's also an argument to be made that catch and release as a religion in bass fishing specifically has not helped us, because I'll give you an example. the slot limit on Caddo Lake. I've interviewed and am good friends with several of the wildlife and fisheries biologists up here. So I did an interview a couple of years ago with Jeff Sibley, who's one of the biologists for our region up here with the wildlife and fisheries. And we got to talking about it. And he said, for the slot limit to work, or for minimum creel limit lengths to work, well, people have to keep fish over the slot and under the slot for the slot limit to work. Otherwise, why even have the slot? And it really got me to thinking, as much as I've been a proponent of catch and release, yeah, he's right. And, look, in hunting, we can't catch and release the deer. We can't catch and release the ducks or the squirrels or whatever. Well, I guess we could. We could just go out there and take pictures of them, but what's the fun in that? But it's the same thing. You have to, in deer, you have to manage the herd, and sometimes that requires thinning out the herd. In fish, you have to manage the fish, and sometimes that requires thinning them out. And again, most of the fisheries, we created the fisheries, the vast majority of them, and we have literally created that renewable resource in those fish, and they have to be managed or they can get out of whack. And so I'm a big proponent of forward-facing sonar. I know I kind of went all the way around the woodshed on that one, but I'm a big proponent of forward-facing sonar. If somebody doesn't want to use it, that's fine too,
Yeah, they don't have to. It's here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and look, there have been a couple tournament trails where they don't, allow the use of forward-facing sonar, and I'm all for that too. If I want to, fish old school, if you can even define old school. I mean, how do you define old school fishing? Was that before we had bass boats? Was that when we were still fishing out of pirogues and canoes? Was it before we had open face reels, before spinning reels? What exactly is old school fishing? I mean, I'm old enough. I can remember when the paper graphs came out, and we thought, oh my gosh, we got this guy. I remember when this guy in our bass club, not to interrupt you, this guy in our bass club got a paper graph, and we were like, oh no, now he's not going to have to triangulate, and he doesn't have to use marker buoys. He can just see it on his graph. I mean, of course, that was long before GPS. And that's a whole other discussion.
Yes. GPS actually got me off the shore, because before that, I would not go into the Great Lakes. And then when I got GPS, the first GPS, you used to have to go off and make six waypoints that surrounded your locate or your boat ramp, so that you could find the boat ramp, and when you're offshore in the Great Lakes.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's even a challenge up there on Caddo Lake.
That's the end of fishing as we know it.
Oh yeah, it's everybody has a short memory. When I came back into bass fishing, I started noticing this. It's like nobody can remember past about 10 years ago. I don't know what it is. They can't remember past 10 years ago. I started to tell this story, so I'll tell it real quick. Back in the 90s, in the mid-90s, I went fishing on Bull Shoals Lake with a guy named Lynn Luther. We were taking flashers, our 1240A flasher. He had one rigged up on his boat, and he showed me how to do this. I had never fished, on Bull Shoals in a clear water lake like this before. And he took his transducer on his trolling motor, had it mounted on his trolling motor, and he had it cocked over about 1 to 2 degrees. And we were taking his 1240A flasher and catching boatloads of spots and largemouth at 20-something foot deep with that flasher. We would go over. He had an X55A graph on the console, so we would graph the schools of shad in the middle of these creek channels. They call them guts up there. And we would graph the balls of shad, and these balls of shad were the size of a school bus. And then when he saw one that he liked, we'd circle back around with the 1240A flasher on the trolling motor. We were taking these 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce cheap gas station spoons that we changed the hooks out on. You would drop the spoon down, see it in real time on the flasher, punch through the ball of shad. Like the spoon would literally stop, and you could feel it bouncing off the shad. And when you punch through the shad, you could see it in real time on the 1240 flasher, and you would see the bass about 2 or 3 foot below. And he said, look, just just hit the bottom of that bait ball because they're going to think it's a shad fluttering down. And when the two lines meet, your spoon will be the weak line. And then the harder return of the bass, when those two lines meet, he said, don't even hesitate, just set the hook. And we were literally doing this in the mid-90s. It was basically forward-facing sonar. It just wasn't facing forward, it was facing
what you
down.
What you described there is a product called a Vexilar that ice fishermen have been using for decades. That is exactly how a Vexilar is used. But they had, red, yellow, and green means that the two lines hit just like you described. Time to set the hook.
Yeah. We were doing this on.
It's been going on for a long time. You guys figured it out, which is awesome.
Yeah, it is. And so, again,
I've
got a pretty good long-term memory on this, and I've been doing this for a long time. And obviously I'm pretty opinionated, but most of my opinions I can back up with some pretty hardcore facts on it too. So I don't see that forward-facing sonar is going to kill our sport or anything. If anything, it's enhancing it. Look, here's the dirty little secret. Bass fishing is not growing as a sport. You hear everybody in the industry say, oh, we got to do this to grow the sport, The reason they want to try to grow the sport is because they know it's not growing. It's literally flatlining and falling off again. And forward-facing sonar has got the interest of a lot of kids because they like to do it. And if we don't start feeding that pipeline, the sport we love in bass fishing is going to continue to die. We did have a little bit of a spike during the COVID area, but that has since receded. And if you look at license sales and all the other indicators, we're back to flatline and slowly dying. If we don't feed that pipeline, then the sport that we know and love, tournament fishing, bass fishing in general, is going to die a slow death again.
Yes, I agree with you. And that's why, back to what we started this conversation with, the states, other than Texas, I think Texas is doing a fantastic job promoting the sport. But other states, Mississippi has great potential. Alabama does a decent job. But Louisiana has to really step it up.
Yeah. On that, we 100% agree. And like I said, I hope with our new secretary and a new administration down there in Baton Rouge, I can share this with you because I kind of have an inside track on all that. I can definitely say that the Wildlife and Fisheries is looking at completely changing the way that they've done things in the past. And I see that as a very positive deal.
Wow. I'm glad you told me that because I had thought about that since I started this podcast back in 2019, and I started talking to guys from all over the state.
Yeah, it's like I said,
a lot of room for improvement. The potential is huge from the bottom of the state all the way to the top.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, I'm very excited just based on what I know now. The proof's in the pudding. We'll see here in the next couple of years because look, none of this is going to change overnight. It's taken decades to screw this stuff up. And not that all the things that the Wildlife and Fisheries has done in Louisiana is messed up, but some of it definitely needs to go in another direction. And it's taken decades to get it to where the point that it is. So it can't be fixed overnight. But there are some good signs. Like I said, again, using Bussy Break, the recent, stuff over the last couple of years at Caney Lake is a prime example of what our Wildlife and Fisheries can do if the management will just listen to the biologists and the guys on the ground.
Well,
those are the guys they need to listen to.
Something I'd like to leave these guys with. MLF came here. The guy caught a 13-pound bass at Bussy Break. That put Bussy Break on the map. Now look, it's crowded every day of the year now. Guys are catching those 13 pounds. If that isn't proof of what we have here and that we have to continue to help these resources, to invest money, because it is an investment. Like you said, it's not going to happen overnight, but if we invest in it and people start catching more 13-pounders in other lakes, man, we might have to build new airports up there, you know?
Yeah.
Guys,
The honest truth is people come here for the big bass as far as bass fishing goes. Even
yeah.
in the crappie tournaments, they're coming here to catch quality crappie. I mean, yeah, people want to catch numbers and have a good time, but the big fish and the big crappie, and I guess the big catfish in the catfishing world, are what really attract people and attract those dollars that people are willing to spend.
Oh yeah, people aren't going to take a flight for 30, these. No.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're
But
absolutely right.
if they can catch 2-pounders like they catch over in in Mississippi,
Right.
they will be dropping 12 hours,
Hey, you want me to show a little video to your audience from Caddo Lake? This is never before. I hadn't published this video
do.
yet. Yeah, so let me see if I can get this to work. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm on Caddo Lake here, and you'll see me make this cast. I think I've got it queued up at the right spot. Yep, there it is.
Look at that.
It's just Caddo Lake is such a gorgeous lake.
Look at that.
I'm in a foot of water. My trolling motor's churning mud.
Look at that. Watch this, folks. Both flip, both flip, both flip.
I absolutely love Caddo Lake, and especially throwing a frog on Caddo Lake.
This evening, no doubt about it.
We have a comment from the audience. Roy Widgeon said, good fisheries that produce anglers. Good catches attract tourists. You're exactly right, Roy.
Yeah, 100% correct. And Caddo Lake is known for that. It's not just the scenery and the innate beauty on Caddo Lake. It's because it's a good quality fishery. I mean, you can see, let's see if I can, yeah, you can see that's a good solid fish right there. Good, 4 3/4, bumping 5 pound. Yeah. And I catch a lot of those, and a lot of people catch, a lot of quality fish. That's what we call an over, because there's a slot limit on Caddo Lake, 14 to 18 inch. So it has to be over 18 inches for you to be able to keep it even in a tournament. And that's what we call an over up there. It's over the 18-inch slot, which puts it at about, that fish probably about 4.5, bumping 5 pounds.
Wow. That is a beautiful fish, man. And what did you catch that on, Rex?
I caught that on a frog. I'm a big proponent of the Spro frog. I pull them straight out of the package. I don't even tweak the hooks. I might trim the legs a little bit, but I'm a huge guy that believes in throwing a frog on Caddo Lake. Caught just a ton of fish on a frog.
So if you weren't throwing a frog, what would you be throwing?
Well, it kind of depends. I throw a chatterbait a lot, or some. I also throw, interestingly enough, a wobblehead. Not the wobblehead as far as the jig. The wobblehead, that's the piece of metal that's shaped like a spoon. I don't have one in front of me or a picture of one. I did a whole wobblehead video. If you go check out my YouTube feed or channel, or check out my Facebook page. But I did a whole video on the wobblehead, which is the one that was designed back in the 60s and 70s. Good friend of mine over in West Monroe, I actually bought the company several years ago and started putting better hooks on it. And you use a straight tail like a cream worm is my favorite to use on it. And it kind of looks like a little snake. So starting about this time of the year on into the summer, I'll throw that a lot. And then I've got another video out where I was catching them on a jig,
Okay.
Of course, creature baits, the standard deal is pretty common on Caddo Lake.
You ever throw you ever throw any wacky rigs?
I throw a wacky rig quite a bit. I love to wacky or throw a Cinco wacky style.
Sure.
And so catch a lot of big fish on that. I'll throw it a lot of times on a spinning rod. Some of these young kids can skip a bait caster much better than me. So I'll kind of cheat a little bit and use the spinning rod to cast the wacky rig.
Well, that's
what I do that with a Cinco a lot. Yeah.
I like to throw the 48, a missile baits 48, or a Yamakanudi.
Yeah, I had never thrown the Yamakanudi yet. I pretty much stick with the Cinco, and then oddly enough, Bass Pro Shops had some on sale not too long ago. Which brand were they? Yeah. Anyway, so I bought a bunch of those, and honestly, they work just as good as the Cincos usually. So
sure. Wow. Well, we're 48 after the hour. Rex, man, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you and complaining about stuff.
Oh, it's okay. Look, I've really enjoyed it too. I appreciate you. I have no problem getting on my soapbox, and so I appreciate you having me on your show, and look forward to maybe doing one in the future. And we'll talk some more about fishing. And look, if you're ever up this way, give me a holler, and we'll run the Caddo or go to Bistano or something like that.
Don't say that unless you want me to show, because I will show up.
Come on, I hadn't put my boat in the water and. I hadn't put my boat in the water in 2 weekends because I was helping the high schoolers last weekend, and the weekend before, it was raining and flooding and all that. And so I'm chomping at the bit to get back on the water. So you're welcome anytime.
Roy Widgeon said you need a Corrado DC to skip a baitcaster.
That's true. I'm still using the when I got back into fishing. A lot of my rods and reels I had sold off and all that. So I bought a lot of these Lew's combo rods. And I got to say, I've been pretty pleased with them, especially for like $150, $160 for the combo. And I can skip with them. What I really need to do, and I appreciate his comment, what I really need to do is actually get out there and practice some more with it.
Yes. That's one thing I love to say. There is no substitute for time on the water. I know I run a fishing podcast, but man, that's one of my soapboxes. Turn off the computer, get out there in the water.
Yep. Can't argue with that at all. I agree again, 100%.
But I just feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot saying that.
Well, it's kind of self-serving. See, my excuse is I got to get back out there on the water to shoot more cool videos so I can go back and show it off across the screen.
There you go. You just blew my thing. Well, hey, Rex, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, yeah. Anytime. Like I said, I'm always glad to get on my soapbox. I can sit here and rattle off fishing stuff, especially bass fishing stuff, pretty much as long as you need me to.
So let's stay in touch. I am going to take you up on that. I'm going to be talking to my wife about that. And hey, honey, I'm taking another trip.
Yeah, there you go. Road trip.
But there's big bass.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey guys, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into the Let's Talk Fishing video podcast. Again, my name is Jay Angel with Rex Moncrief from the Outdoor News. And Rex, stick around. I'm going to end the podcast with that. I'd like to talk to you for 2 minutes afterwards.
Sounds like a plan.
And guys, man, it's Wednesday. Make your plans. Get out there. Go fishing this weekend. Remember, you only get to do this once.